Good afternoon and welcome back to Girded with Truth. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are continuing our series on a sacrificial offering. God requires all of us, and in order for us to demonstrate what all looks like, we have to give a sacrificial offering. Now, every person's sacrificial offering might look different because what is hard for you to give up is not hard for me to give up. I may not struggle with the same things you struggle with, and that's what makes our kingdom such a dynamic kingdom, because of the fact that we dwell in relationship and not in religion. There is no formula by which we can operate, but it's simply by relationship with God, governed by the laws, statutes, and commandments of God. So today, we're getting into Genesis chapter 22, verses 9 to 12. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham fetched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Now, this is Abraham. He went to the place God showed him. He has been on this faith walk, and God has sent him to offer his son Isaac back to him. Sometimes we use methods that are familiar to us, but God has been saying that is not the way He wants it done. To give that statement some context, here we are seeing Abraham offering his son up the only way he knows how to. Normally in those days, when you have to make an offering, you build an altar, you lay the sacrifice on the altar, and you slay the sacrifice. And God now is asking us for a sacrificial offering. So this is simply the way it has always been done. But God did not require Abraham to take Isaac's life. He blessed Abraham with Isaac for a purpose. But the reason why He asked him to sacrifice Isaac is because He needed to know there is nothing that will keep Abraham from God. He needed to know, you prayed, you cried, you talked to me when you needed the blessing. Now I have given you the blessing. Are you still going to wait before me? Are you still going to be in relationship with me like you once were? Are you still going to want me with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind? And this is the reason for the test. So God could discern where Abraham was when he received the blessing. And this test wasn't just because. It was because God had more for Abraham. So He wanted to know if Abraham was willing to give up what he had on the level he had it in order to receive more from God. And all of us will be in that position in one way or the other, at one time or another. And when Abraham heard the angel calling, he said, Here am I. When we first met Abraham and God was calling out to him, he said, Here I am, with boldness. He approached God. But after receiving the news of sacrificing Isaac, after being by the altar, where it became real that he had to sacrifice his son, he took a position of humility. So instead of standing up and saying, "Here I am," he's now saying, "Here am I." Because he's now in a position of humility, ready to hear what the Lord has to say. Just waiting, holding on to that last glimmer of hope. Sometimes situations look helpless. Sometimes they look hopeless. Sometimes it looks like everything is falling apart. Abraham prayed and cried so long for this son. He sent Ishmael away because God told him that the promised seed was Isaac. So Isaac was the only heir to Abraham's throne. But here God is saying, sacrifice your only heir. Abraham was old. He did not know if he would be able to bear any more children. So God is telling him, sacrifice everything in this moment. Sacrificing his son didn't just mean sacrificing the child he prayed for all these years. It meant that he was sacrificing his legacy. It meant that he was sacrificing everything that he worked so hard for. And there was a possibility that he would not have anyone else to take the place of an heir. But God did not want to take that away from Abraham, but instead he wanted Abraham to give it back to him. God gives us so many things, but he expects us to give it back to him so that he can multiply it, so that he can expand it, so that he can do what he needs to do in order to ensure that we are successful. The angel called out to Abraham and said, "Now I know of a certain you fear God, because you did not withhold your son." So here, Abraham is not just learning who God is, but he is learning the extent that he's willing to go to secure his relationship with God, to ensure that his relationship with God does not perish. He is learning some things about himself as he is learning how to trust God. Everything that we are is wrapped up in who God is. In order to learn yourself, you have to seek after God. So here Abraham is standing, having done everything God told him to do, ready to sacrifice his only son, because God requires a sacrificial offering. And Abraham has no problem doing it, because he knows that God is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. The same God that gave him Isaac is the same God that will ensure Isaac is protected. Today we're talking about position and protected, because Abraham is positioned in obedience. Isaac is positioned on the altar. But this seed of Abraham, Isaac, is also protected by God. Abraham is protected by God. Therefore, his seed is protected by God. So the covenant that God made with Abraham still stands. God positioned Abraham, Abraham positioned Isaac, but God protected them both. If you would give God that sacrificial offering, if you would give him everything you have, even the last that you have, he will ensure that you and everything connected to you is protected. Do not withhold from God in this season. This season, God wants you to release everything so that you will be positioned for what he has to bestow unto you. Do not have regrets. Do not stand wavering. Instead, stand like Abraham at the beginning with boldness, and then in humility open to what God is doing in your life. I encourage you today, ensure that you are positioned. Ensure that God positions you so that you will be under His protection. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.